There's a moment, and if you've ever been truly betrayed by someone you tried to love, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that split second when everything you suspected, everything you told yourself you were imagining, everything you swallowed down with a smile and a nod, it all crystallizes into one undeniable, stomach-dropping truth. For me, that moment came at a birthday party, in a backyard full of people I loved, when I looked down at a plate of food someone had handed me with a beaming smile and noticed shrimp. Shrimp that could have killed me. Shrimp that could have killed my unborn child. And the woman holding the plate? She was my husband's sister. She was smiling.
If you've ever had someone in your life who smiled to your face while quietly plotting your destruction, this story is for you. Stay with me, because what unfolds over the next hour is one of the most jaw-dropping, emotionally devastating, and ultimately satisfying stories I have ever lived. And yes, I said because the ending of this story nearly didn't happen for me at all. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and buckle in, because we are going deep today. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a dramatic person. I have never been someone who thrives on conflict, who picks fights, who goes looking for enemies. I am the kind of woman who keeps her head down, works hard, loves her people fiercely, genuinely tries to see the good in everyone. I tell you this not because I want sympathy. I tell you this because I need you to understand just how far someone has to push a person like me before things get. My name doesn't matter, but my life matters. And for the past 7 years, it has been beautiful and complicated in equal measure. Because while I had found the love of my life in my husband Harry, I had also, without signing up for, inherited a shadow. A shadow that wore a smile, attended family dinners, and spent years quietly, methodically trying to dismantle everything. Her name is Kayla, and she is Harry's sister. When Harry and I first met, I was immediately struck by how warm his family was. His parents, Mill and Phil, the kind of in-laws people write about in those heartfelt social media posts, welcomed me with open arms from the very beginning. They were genuine, funny, generous, and kind. Phil had this big booming laugh that filled any room he walked into. Mill had the kind of quiet intelligence that made you feel like she understood you before you even finished your sentence. Falling in love with Harry meant falling in love with his whole world. And I did so willingly and completely. Kayla was there at the edges of all of it from the start. And in those early days, I genuinely liked her. She was sharp and funny, and she had this energy about her that made her the center of any conversation. We would talk for hours at family dinners, laughing about nothing in particular, and I remember thinking, I'm lucky. I've heard horror stories about sisters-in-law. I'm one of the lucky ones. I was not. The shift was so gradual that for a long time I convinced myself I was imagining it. It started with the ex-girlfriends. Harry had dated before me. Of course he had. He was a grown man. And among his exes happened to be 2 women who were close friends with Kayla. The first was a girl he had dated at 17. A relationship he later told me he had felt pressured into precisely because of Kayla's influence. When he was 23 and single, Kayla had pushed hard for him to date another one of her friends. He refused. They had a massive fight. She had cried to their parents. She had wanted desperately to be the architect of her brother's love life, to hand-select the woman who would stand beside him, because in Kayla's world, the woman her brother married would become part of her world too, and she needed to control that. She needed to be able to control that. And then he met me. I was not one of Kayla's choices. I had not been vetted, selected, or approved. I was simply the woman her brother fell in love with. And from the moment our relationship became serious, something in Kayla shifted. The warmth I thought I had seen in her began to have a temperature. It ran cold whenever I walked into a room, whenever Harry and I announced something together, whenever I laughed too loudly or stood too close to her brother. She started bringing up his exes. Not occasionally, not accidentally, persistently, almost compulsively. She would mention them at dinner, casually, like she was just sharing news. Oh, I ran into Sarah the other day. She looks absolutely amazing. You two used to have such a great time together, Harry. You should really reach out. And she would say it with this lightness, like she was doing everyone a favor, like she wasn't sitting directly across from me while she said it. Harry noticed. I want to be clear about that because it matters. Harry was never blind to his sister's behavior. He would ask her, firmly, to stop bringing up his former relationships. She would act wounded, as if she were being accused of something outlandish, and then, and this was always her move, her signature deflection, she would turn it around. She would look at me and say something like, "I didn't realize you were so insecure. Harry, you can't be with someone this insecure." And she would say it with this expression of deep concern on her face, like she was a therapist making a difficult diagnosis rather than a grown woman trying to make her brother's girlfriend feel small. I said nothing. I swallowed it. I kept smiling. I kept showing up to dinners. I kept being gracious and polite and warm because I had decided early on that I was not going to make Harry choose, and I was not going to give Kayla the satisfaction of seeing me ruffled. But she kept going. There was a dinner, I remember this one vividly, where Kayla announced with total composure that she had run into one of Harry's exes that very day and had felt compelled out of politeness to invite her to the family dinner. This woman showed up at a family dinner that I was also attending, and Kayla sat there watching both of us at that table with an expression so serene it could have been painted on. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood at the sink for 5 full minutes, gripping the edge of the basin, breathing slowly, telling myself that she was not worth it, that Harry was worth it, that Mill and Phil were worth it, that my life, this beautiful full life I was building, was worth it. I went back out. I sat down. I smiled. This is what people don't tell you about toxic family members. They don't show up in your life wearing villain costumes. They show up at birthday dinners with a bottle of wine and a smile. They whisper their poison in the language of concern. They plant their seeds of doubt dressed as observations. And if you react, if you ever react, you become the problem. You become the dramatic one. You become her favorite word, insecure. When Harry and I got engaged, I genuinely hoped things would change. I thought, naively, painfully naive, that the formalization of our relationship would signal to Kayla that this was it, this was permanent, that it was time to adjust. Instead, the night of our engagement party, in front of everyone we loved, Kayla went silent the moment we made our announcement. She sat there, stone-faced, while everyone around her erupted in joy, while my mother cried and Phil shook Harry's hand and Mill pulled me into a hug that I still think about when I need to feel safe. And then Kayla stood up, quietly, and walked out, just walked out of her own brother's engagement party. Later that night, she called Harry screaming. She felt she should have been told first, privately, before everyone else, because wasn't she the most important woman in his life? Hadn't she always been there for him? How dare he treat her like just another guest? The message she sent me directly, was something else entirely. I remember reading it in bed that night while Harry slept beside me. She told me I had better be a good wife to brother because she had always been the only woman who truly mattered in his life. She wrote it like a threat wrapped in silk. I stared at my phone screen in the dark for a long. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand. I did not then, not ever. I know that infuriated. Silence, I had learned, was the one language Kayla could not control. The months leading up to our wedding were a masterclass in ignorance. She criticized every choice I made, the flowers, the centerpiece, the venue. She offered her opinions uninvited, loudly, with zero apology. She once overheard me discussing table arrangements with Mill and walked into the room mid-sentence to announce that my taste had no class. She said it breezily, as if commenting on the weather. That was my breaking. I had been holding it together for nearly 2 years at that point. 2 years of biting my tongue, breathing through it, of choosing patience over confrontation because I loved Harry and I loved his parents, and I was not going to be the woman who destroyed his family. But in that moment, standing in that kitchen, something in me simply snapped. I told her she was not invited to our wedding. I said it clearly, calmly, complete conviction. And the look on her face, the absolute shock, the dropped jaw, the wide eyes, I won't lie to you, it felt extraordinary. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because for the first time in 2 years, I had simply told the truth, out loud, without apology, and watched her reckon with. She went crawling to Harry, of course. He stood by me, Mill stood by me. Kayla eventually sent an apology, which I read and did not respond to, and in the end, I allowed her to attend the wedding because I did not want her poisoning the narrative afterward. Did not want her spinning the story of how I had cruelly exiled. She showed up to my wedding in a black floor-length gown with veil. A veil. She told anyone who would listen that she was in mourning for losing her brother. I looked at her standing there, dressed like grief personified at my wedding, and I felt something settle inside me with quiet finality. This woman was not going to stop. She was never going to stop, and I needed to accept that and protect myself.
And that, friends, was just the beginning. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from years of low-grade emotional warfare. It doesn't announce itself dramatically. It seeps in through the cracks of Sunday dinners and family group chats and obligatory holiday gatherings, until one day you realize you are perpetually erased, that you flinch slightly whenever her name appears on your phone, that you do a mental inventory of your words before you speak them around her, checking each one for vulnerabilities she might exploit. That was my life for years. After the wedding, Harry and I settled into a rhythm that was genuinely wonderful. We bought our home, we built our careers. We were happy, deeply, quietly, sustainably happy, in the way that doesn't make for interesting social media posts, but makes for an extraordinary life. When we had our son, Nate, the joy of it was almost overwhelming. He was perfect. He is perfect, and for a while, the existence of this perfect small person made everything else feel small in comparison. I refused to allow Kayla near our newborn, and I made no apologies for it. Harry understood. Mill and Phil understood. They had watched her behavior escalate for years. They had seen enough. And when Nate arrived, I made it quietly, clearly known that my child would not be navigated into her orbit until I felt it was safe. She did try to fight it. She pushed back through Harry, through Mill, through Phil, but this time every single one of them held the line. It was the first time I truly felt the weight of having family behind me. And I want to tell you that if you are fighting a battle like this alone, the presence of people who genuinely see you and choose you is a kind of armor you cannot buy or build. It just is. About 2 years after Nate was born, Kayla suffered a miscarriage with her then-boyfriend Jamie. And I want to be honest with you, because the easiest thing would be to say that I felt nothing or that I was glad. But that's not who I am, and it's not what happened. I felt genuine sadness for her. Harry and I both did. Losing a pregnancy is one of the most devastating experiences a person can go through, and whatever she had done to me, she was still a human being in pain. We decided to extend an olive branch. We invited her to our home. We let her be around Nate. We tried. For a while, for a brief, tentative while, it seemed like maybe it had worked. Kayla was softer around our son. She would sit with him on the floor and play, and there was something in her face during those moments that looked almost like peace. I watched her from the doorway sometimes and thought maybe loss had changed her. Maybe grief had cracked something open in her and let the light in. But grief, I discovered, can also do the opposite. It can crack something open and let the darkness deepen. Within months, she had slipped back. The comments returned, the watchfulness, the way she would sit in our living room and observe me with this slightly narrowed gaze, like she was cataloging everything she saw for later use. She started asking about my gym routine, the frequency that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I go to the gym every morning before work. Sometimes, when I'm running behind, I take my work clothes with me and change there after showering. Perfectly ordinary. Kayla made it strange. She would ask me why I was bringing clothes to the gym, why I was showering. She would purse her lips when I answered and nod in this slow, deliberate way that made every innocent answer feel somehow incriminating. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself she was just being Kayla. Then came the lunch that changed everything. Harry and I went to have a Sunday meal with Mill and Phil. Kayla and Jamie were there too. The conversation turned, as conversations do, to someone Mill knew who was going through a divorce. A woman whose husband had cheated, who had left and taken half his assets. It was nothing more than friendly gossip, the kind of story that gets told over plates of food on Sunday afternoons. And then Kayla put down her fork and asked my husband directly whether we had signed a prenup. The table went quiet. She didn't look at me. She looked at Harry, like I was not sitting right there, like I was furniture or a subject of discussion rather than a participant in the conversation. She asked it with this air of casual concern, like she was asking about the weather,
And then when Harry told her, plainly, without heat, that we both earned well and had seen no need for one, she made a sound in her throat and began to strongly imply and then outright suggest that I was meeting someone else, that my gym bag was evidence of infidelity, that my morning routine was cover for an affair. I remember the exact sensation of hearing those words. It's hard to describe. It was like stepping into ice water, like the temperature of the world dropped 10 degrees in a single second. I turned and looked at her, and I asked her, very quietly, to explain exactly what she was implying. She actually said that she was only looking out for her brother, that it was her duty as his sister to raise her concerns, that she had noticed things. And then, as if the first grenade hadn't been enough, she looked at Nate's empty chair. He hadn't come with us that day, and she made a comment. She suggested, with a little laugh, that Nate might not be Harry's son. I watched my husband's face go from to crimson, to something I had never seen before in 7 years of knowing. Harry is not a man who loses control. He is measured, thoughtful, calm in a way that used to make me tease him about it. But in that moment, at that table, something inside him simply broke. He looked at his sister and he said things that I know even now he is not entirely at peace with. He said that this was why she wasn't a mother yet, that she didn't deserve to be one, that her child was better off in heaven. Both shattered into silence. I don't tell you this because it was a moment of triumph. I tell you this because it was a moment of profound pain for everyone at that table, including me, including Kayla, who sat there with her mouth open and tears streaming down her face while her husband said not a single word in defense. It was a moment where the cumulative weight of years of cruelty collapsed all at once, and the fallout was ugly and raw and human. Afterward, Harry and I went home and we didn't speak about it for a long time. He sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and stared at the wall, and I sat beside him and held his hand, and I think we both understood, quietly, without saying it, that something had fundamentally changed, that we had reached the absolute outer limit of what could be tolerated. We blocked her everywhere. No calls, no texts, no social media. We told Mill and Phil why. They did not argue. They had been there. They had seen it. And for a year, we breathed. For a full, beautiful, uninterrupted year, we just lived. We woke up without dreading our phones. We went to family dinners without scanning the room for a black dress and a cold smile. Nate grew and thrived and became this hilarious, joyful, deeply loved small person. Harry and I fell deeper into each other in the way you can only do when external noise is finally silenced. It was during this year of silence that I discovered I was pregnant again. We hadn't been trying. It was a surprise, the best kind. The kind that makes you put your hand over your mouth in a gas station bathroom and sit down on a closed toilet lid for 5 minutes because you need to let the world catch up with what your body just told you. We sat with the news for weeks, just the two of us, letting it become real before we shared it. We decided to announce it at Harry's birthday party, a celebration his parents were hosting in their backyard, filled with the people who loved him most. We had no idea Kayla was coming. When she walked through that gate with a smile on her face, something in my stomach twisted. I should have listened to that feeling. I should have listened. She walked in like she belonged. That was always Kayla's gift, the ability to occupy any space with total confidence, as if the world had been arranged specifically for her arrival. She was dressed well, smiling broadly, and she made her way directly to Harry with open arms and a tearful apology on lips. I watched this from across the yard. I watched her hug my husband and tell him how much she had missed him, and I watched his body go slightly still in a particular way it does when he is deciding how to handle something. He took my hand. He told his sister calmly and clearly that if she was going to apologize, she owed one to me first. She turned to me. She apologized. She mentioned therapy. She mentioned growth. She looked at me with these wide, earnest eyes and spoke about how she had come to understand her patterns of behavior, how she recognized the harm she had caused, how she was committed to doing better. I nodded. I said something gracious. I did not believe a single. But here's the thing about people like Kayla. They know exactly which words to use. They have spent years watching how genuine emotion looks, and they have learned to imitate it with remarkable precision. And so even as I stood there knowing in my bones that something was off, I was also second-guessing myself. She's been to therapy. People do change. Maybe.
Mill and Phil pulled Harry and me aside quietly and told us that they had not known she was coming, that they were sorry, and that if at any point we wanted her gone, they would hand. Harry decided to let. He didn't want a scene at his own birthday. He wanted a good day. So we let it go. And for a while, the day was good. The yard was full of warmth and laughter, children running between the adults' legs, the smell of food on the air, the golden particular light of a late afternoon that makes everything look like a memory even while it's happening. Harry gave a speech that made my eyes burn. He talked about how grateful he was for another year, for our son, for our life. He looked at me the whole time he spoke. I felt so full I almost couldn't stand it. And then we told everyone about the baby. The yard erupted. My mother cried, Mill cried, Phil cried. People were hugging us and asking about names and whether we knew the gender, and all the beautiful, chaotic, joyful noise of people who love you sharing your happiness. It was everything I had imagined it. And in the middle of all of it, I caught a glimpse of Kayla. She was standing slightly apart from the crowd, perfectly still, with this expression on her face that I can only describe as a thundercloud passing behind her eyes. The smile she'd worn all afternoon was gone. In its place was something raw and dark and coiled, something she hadn't quite managed to hide in time before I looked. Our eyes met for just a second. Then she composed herself, rearranged her features, and turned away. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was processing. I told myself that even jealousy doesn't make someone dangerous. I was wrong about that last one.
The food was brought out in stages, and at a certain point, I got up to help bring things from the kitchen, the instinct of someone who has spent years being useful at family gatherings. My parents and Harry stopped me immediately, practically pushing me back into my seat, reminding me that I was pregnant and should not be carrying any. I laughed and sat back down, and I waited while Harry went to fix me a plate. And then Kayla appeared beside me. She was carrying a plate. She held it out to me with both hands, like an offer, beaming. She said, loudly so people nearby could hear, that she personally wanted to serve me, that she wanted to make it up to me for all the years she had been unkind, that she was so happy about my pregnancy. She placed the plate in my hands with this gesture of almost theatrical warmth, and then stepped back, still smiling, and walked away. I looked down at the plate. There was shrimp on it, a generous serving of shrimp nestled right in the center. Now, I want you to understand something. My shrimp allergy is not a secret in that family. It is the kind of thing that gets mentioned at every gathering, that shows up as a note in texts when people are planning the menu, that Mill and Phil have accommodated at every single family meal for 7 years. There is not a person in Harry's family who does not know that shrimp could send me into anaphylactic shock. It is known. It is categorically, absolutely known. I stared at the plate, and my mind went very, very quiet. It wasn't panic that I felt in that moment. It was something stranger, a kind of cold, crystalline clarity. The noise of the party seemed to pull back like a wave receding from the shore, and I sat there in the sudden inner silence looking at this plate of shrimp and understanding something that I was not ready to say out loud yet, even to myself. I set the plate aside. I got up quietly to get my own food. Jamie found me near the food table. He was warm and friendly, asking me how I was feeling, congratulating me again on the pregnancy. He noticed I wasn't eating, and I gestured vaguely toward the plate and said something about the shrimp being a mistake. He was easy and kind about it, told me not to worry, said he loved shrimp and would take the plate off my hands. I smiled and walked away and went to fill a new plate for myself. I was back at my seat, laughing with my mother about baby names, when the sound changed. It wasn't a scream, exactly. It was more like a disruption, a collective gasp, a sudden shift in the energy of the yard, the sound of a chair scraping back and something clattering to the ground. I turned to look. Jamie was on his feet, stumbling. His face had gone an alarming color. He was reaching for his throat. He pointed at the plate, and then his knees buckled and he went down. I don't fully remember the next few minutes. I remember people moving, surging toward him. I remember Kayla's scream cutting across the yard like a blade. I remember someone shouting for someone else to call an ambulance. And I remember standing completely still with my plate in my hands, my mind stuck on a single repeating thought that I could not process fast enough. He ate my food. He ate my food. He was poisoned, and he ate my food, and that food was meant for me. The ambulance came. Jamie was rushed out. Kayla went with him, and as she passed me, she turned and looked at me with this expression, this frantic, wild-eyed expression, and asked me if I had given Jamie my plate. I nodded, and something moved across her face that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't grief exactly. It wasn't horror. It was something closer to the look of someone who has just realized that the thing they threw has come back around. The party dissolved. The police were called. The food was bagged as evidence. People spoke in low, frightened voices and then went home, and I sat in the quiet wreckage of what had been Harry's birthday and held myself very still and said nothing about what I knew. Not yet.
I couldn't sleep that night. I lay beside Harry in the dark and listened to him breathe, and I thought about my allergy, the kind that closes your throat within minutes, the kind that has an EpiPen stationed at every location I frequent, the kind that in a pregnant woman, in the chaos of a birthday party where an ambulance might take 8 minutes to arrive, could absolutely kill you. I thought about my baby. I put my hand on my stomach in the dark, and I thought, she gave me that plate on purpose. She knew what was on it. She knew exactly what was on it. And the thought that followed that one, the one that made me press my hand harder against my stomach, she knew, and she still smiled. I waited until the next evening to speak. I needed to be sure of myself. I needed to be calm, because when I laid out what I knew, I was not going to stumble. I was not going to cry. I was going to be precise and clear and completely certain. There is something almost meditative about knowing the truth before anyone else does. It is not comfortable. I want to be clear about that. The knowledge sat inside me like a stone, heavy and cold and constant. I couldn't eat. I could barely function. Harry kept watching me with worried eyes, touching my shoulder, asking me if I was okay, and I would nod and say I was just shaken from the events of the party, which was true, just not the whole truth. I spent that day going over it in my mind from every possible angle. I tested it against every charitable interpretation I could construct. Maybe she had made a genuine mistake about the shrimp. Maybe she had forgotten about my allergy after a year of no contact. Maybe the poison had nothing to do with her, and everything was a terrible coincidence. But each time I tried to build that case, it collapsed under its own weight. Because you do not forget a life-threatening allergy. Not after 7 years. Not when you have attended every family gathering, every holiday, every dinner where accommodations were made. You do not forget. And if the shrimp had simply been a mistake, a horrible, accidental mistake, she would have been horrified when I pointed it out. She would have been apologetic, flustered, alarmed. Instead, she had walked away smiling. She had walked away smiling. The following evening, with Mill and Phil already staying at our home because they were too shaken to return to their own, I sat down at the dinner table and I told them everything. I had rehearsed it, not in a calculated, cold way, but in the way you rehearse something when you know that how you say it matters, when you know that the people listening are going to be devastated and you owe them the clearest possible account. I started at the beginning, the plate, the shrimp, the smile. I told them about my allergy and what shrimp would have done to me. I told them that I had realized in the moment I saw Jamie collapse that the food had been intended for me. I told them I was terrified, and I was sorry for not speaking sooner, and that I understood if they needed time to process it. The silence that followed was the longest of my life.
Mill looked at Phil. Phil at Harry. Harry looked at his hand, and then he looked at me with an expression that I had never seen on his face before and hoped never to see. This raw, gutted, grief-stricken, like something had been taken from him that he hadn't known could be taken. Mill spoke first. She said they needed to check the cameras. Phil had security cameras installed on the entire their property. Practical decision or a break-in several years prior that had nothing to do with this. The backyard cameras had been running throughout the party. We gathered around Phil's phone. He pulled up the footage from the app, and we all sat there in silence, watched. The footage was clear, crisp. You could see Kayla approach the food table. You could see her add shrimp to a plate with deliberate, careful movements. You could see her carry the plate across the yard to where I was sitting. You could see her hand it to me with both hands, beaming, performing warmth for anyone watching. And then you could see me look down at the plate. You could see my face change. You could see me set the plate aside and get up. We watched it 3 times. Nobody spoke. Then Harry stood up from the table and walked to the window and stood there with his back to us full minute. When he turned around, his voice was very quiet and very steady and absolutely terrifying in its stillness.
He said that his sister had tried to kill his wife and his unborn child. He said those words out loud, in that order, and each one of them landed like a stone dropped in. Phil said they were calling the police in the morning. Mill was crying without sound, the kind of crying that is so deep it barely makes a sound at all, just this steady, quiet grief for a daughter she had loved and clearly not known as well as she thought. Harry sat back down beside me and took my hand and held it so tightly it almost hurt, and I understood the tightness to mean something he couldn't say, that he was holding on, that he was making sure I was still here, that he was furious and devastated and grateful and terrified all at once. We gave the footage to the police the next day. They reviewed it, they spoke to witnesses, they bagged what remained of the food from the party, and within a short time they had enough to make an arrest. When Kayla was brought in for questioning, she didn't deny it. She sat down across from the investigators and she cried. She cried and she confessed. And what she confessed to was so revealing, so heartbreakingly illuminating that I want you to really. She said she had never wanted me to marry her brother. She said she had spent years watching me take him away from her, pull him into a life that felt like it excluded her, and she had never been able to accept it. She said that when we announced the pregnancy at the party, she was on the verge of announcing her own pregnancy. She was pregnant, she had found out recently, and she had planned to share her news that day, and she felt we had stolen her moment. She felt we had, once again, taken something. She said her pregnancy hormone. She said she only put a small amount of rat poison in the food. She said she only wanted me in the hospital, not dead, as if the distinction was one that absolved her of anything. She said she hadn't meant for Jamie to. She said I had essentially poisoned my own sister-in-law's husband by giving away the plate. She made this argument out loud to a judge. The judge was not.
She was convicted. Multiple charges: tampering with food, endangering life, causing bodily harm. The sentence was significant. She was going to prison, and she was going for long enough that the word prison would mean something real and prolonged and consequential. I did not attend her court proceedings. I want to be honest about that. I could not sit in a room with her and listen to her talk about me. I could not watch her perform victimhood for a jury. Harry attended some sessions. Mill and Phil attended others. They would come home and sit quietly, and I would make them tea, and I would listen, and we would absorb it together, this family that had been cracked open by one of its own members. The detail that stayed with me longest, the detail that I have turned over and over in the months since, is that in her confession, Kayla admitted she had been jealous of me for years. Not just frustrated with me, not just resentful, jealous. She had looked at my life and wanted it, or more specifically, she had wanted to be the one who chose who got to have it. She had wanted to be the gatekeeper of her brother's heart, and when she couldn't be, when he simply loved me and kept loving me and built a life with me, something in her had never recovered. Jamie pressed charges. He did not hesitate. He had watched his wife cry and manipulate and perform for years, and something about nearly dying at a birthday party because of food she had tampered with clarified everything for him with brutal efficiency. He filed for divorce the same week he pressed charges. He was calm about it, in a way that spoke to long, private suffering. When Harry sat down with him after he was discharged from the hospital, he looked at my husband and said, "I think I've known for a long time that she wasn't well. I just kept hoping she would choose to get better." I understood that sentence in my bones. We have kept Jamie close. He has come to Sunday dinners. He has met our daughter. He is, in some strange and unexpected way, one of the people from this chapter of our lives that I feel most warmly toward. This gentle, unsuspecting man who nearly died for the crime of being kind enough to take a plate off a pregnant woman's hands. He always tells me it wasn't mine. Every time I start to apologize, he stops me and says it clearly and firmly, "Not your fault." I am working on believing him. I am working on it. Our daughter arrived in the early hours of a weekday morning, in a room full of soft light and the sound of Harry's voice, and she was perfect. The kind of perfect that makes you forget the weight of everything that came before, that makes you understand, viscerally, physically, beyond words, what you were fighting to protect. She has Harry's eyes and my stubbornness, and her brother is completely devoted to her in a way that makes me laugh every single time I see it. I go to therapy now. I want to say that clearly and without any embarrassment because I think it matters. After what happened, I developed a fear of eating food I hadn't prepared myself. Not a small, manageable anxiety, a genuine, gripping fear. I would sit at a restaurant and feel my hands go cold as the plate was set in front of me. I would watch my mother-in-law bring a dish to the table and feel my heart rate climb. I knew it was irrational. I knew it, and I went to therapy anyway, because knowing something is irrational does not make it not real. And I refused to let what Kayla had done take the simple pleasure of a shared meal from me for the rest of my life. I am better. I am not completely. I don't know if completely healed is something that exists on the other side of this kind of experience, but I am better. I can sit at a dinner table without bracing myself. I can eat food made by someone I love without cataloging the distance to the nearest hospital. I am getting there. People ask me sometimes, usually people who have heard the broad strokes of this story, whether I feel guilty, whether I feel responsible for what happened to Jamie. And I want to answer that honestly, because I think it deserves an honest answer. Yes, for a long time I felt responsible. I replayed the moment of handing him that plate on a constant loop. I thought about what I could have done differently, thrown the plate away, looked more carefully, noticed something. The guilt was real, and it was heavy, and I carried it for months. But here is the truth that I have had to learn and relearn and sometimes fight to hold on to. I did not put poison in that food. I did not hand Jamie a plate knowing what was on it. I handed him a plate of what I believed was shrimp, which I couldn't eat but which he had offered to take, which he liked, which neither of us had any reason to question. Kayla put poison in that food. Kayla handed it to me with a smile. Kayla is the only person in this story who made a choice that resulted in harm, and that choice was entirely hers.
I am not responsible for what she chose to do. I am only responsible for how I move forward. And this is how I move forward with my husband, who is still the person I fell in love with all those years ago. Still steady, still funny, still capable of surprising me. With my son Nate, who knows now, in age-appropriate terms, that sometimes people in families make very bad choices and hurt the people they're supposed to love, and that it's okay to protect yourself from people who do that, even if those people are family. With my daughter, who is too small yet to know any of this, but who will grow up in a house where she is safe and known and ferociously loved. With Mill and Phil, who have grieved the daughter they thought they knew and are slowly, painfully, honestly reconstructing their understanding of who she is. They write to her. They have visited. They are trying to love her from a distance, in the complicated way that parents must sometimes love children who have done terrible things, without condoning and without abandoning. I admire them for navigating that. I do not envy them the task. With Jamie, who has rebuilt his life with a quiet grace that I find genuinely inspiring, who shows up, who is okay. And with myself, with the version of me that stood at a bathroom sink 7 years ago, gripping the basin, telling herself that the woman outside was not worth it. I want to go back to that woman and tell her, you were right. She wasn't worth your silence. She wasn't worth your endurance. She wasn't worth years of swallowed words and bitten tongues and carefully maintained smiles. But you are worth everything that came after. What Kayla wanted more than anything was to make me feel small, to make me feel like I didn't belong in her brother's life, in her family, in the space I had built and claimed and earned. She wanted me to leave. And when I didn't leave, she tried to make leaving the only option. Instead, I am still here. I am still here, and she is not. There is no grand speech I can make about that, no triumphant monologue, just the quiet, solid fact of my continued presence in this life that I love, in this family that chose me as fiercely as I chose them. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.
If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever had someone in your life who smiled while they were hurting you, I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not imagining it. Drop a comment below and tell me what you took from this story, because this community is built on exactly these kinds of conversations. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. We go deep here every single time. And until next time, trust your gut, protect your plate, and remember, the people who are truly meant to be in your life will never make you question whether they belong.